In a dynamic session at the White House on Tuesday, the Trump administration convened its sixth cabinet meeting of the second term, navigating a complex agenda that spanned dire domestic crises, contentious economic policies, and volatile international relations. The gathering offered a revealing glimpse into the administration's priorities and the political landscape it inhabits, marked by strong rhetoric, strategic shifts, and unwavering loyalty from its allies. A shadow cast over the meeting was the catastrophic flooding in Texas, which has claimed over 100 lives, including numerous children. While President Trump announced his visit to the affected region with the First Lady on Friday, the disaster quickly became a flashpoint for political debate. Democrats, led by Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, swiftly called for a government watchdog investigation into weather staffing cuts at the National Weather Service (NWS), a consequence of the administration's Department of Government Efficiency (DOGE) initiatives, had compromised forecasting capabilities. The NWS, which had seen early retirements and leadership vacancies, defended its performance, but critics like Rick Wilson of the Lincoln Project decried the Republican response as a sickness and dysfunction, noting their desperately, deeply afraid stance to criticize the president. Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, however, lauded President Trump's swift and very robust action in approving federal assistance, with Noem attributing any NWS issues to past neglect, stating, "The National Weather Service under President Trump has been working to put in new technology and a new system because it's been neglected for years." Senator Ted Cruz echoed this, emphasizing, "There's a time to have political fights. This is not that time." Yet political analysts like Larry Sabato suggested that the deep cuts in government engineered by Trump and Musk could eventually exact a political toll on congressional Republicans. Economically, the administration continued its high-stakes tariff negotiations. President Trump had on Monday signed an executive order extending the pause on many duties until August 1, a deadline that has since seen a curious shift in firmness. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent during the cabinet meeting offered an optimistic outlook on tariff revenue, stating, "We will have taken in about $100 billion in tariff income thus far this year, and projecting well over $300 billion by the end of the year, a figure he believes will dwarf the Congressional Budget Office's CBO 10-year projection of $2.8 trillion. However, the economic implications of these tariffs remain hotly debated. Stephen Miron, chair of the White House's Council of Economic Advisers, downplayed concerns about price hikes, controversially comparing such events to a meteor strike, while China's state media, the People's Daily, warned of resolute countermeasures should unfavorable deals arise from the new tariff regime. Despite previously signaling openness to extensions, President Trump later clarified on Truth Social that the August 1 deadline was firm, declaring no extensions will be granted. Foreign policy discussions underscored the administration's assertive global posture. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's return to the White House for further talks on Gaza dominated the Middle East agenda. President Trump indicated that discussions would be almost exclusively Gaza, with Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff expressing optimism for a 60-day Gaza ceasefire agreement by week's end, aiming for the release of 10 live and 9 deceased hostages. This comes amidst continued controversy surrounding the idea of relocating Palestinians from Gaza, a plan that has faced widespread international condemnation. On the Russia-Ukraine war, President Trump delivered a surprisingly harsh rebuke to Vladimir Putin, stating, "We get a lot of bull thrown at us by Putin. If you want to know the truth, he's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless." He also indicated he was looking very strongly at congressional Republican efforts led by Senator Lindsey Graham to impose greater sanctions on Russia, and confirmed that the U.S. would send more weapons to Ukraine, an apparent reversal after Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had paused shipments, citing munitions stockpile reviews. Furthermore, the administration celebrated recent military strikes on Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities, with President Trump praising the military's actions while criticizing media coverage. In a notable shift, the Trump administration also announced it was revoking the terrorism designation of a group led by Syria's new president Ahmad al-Shara, a move Secretary of State Marco Rubio said recognizes the positive actions taken by the new Syrian government. Domestically, the meeting was not without its moments of tension and unexpected pronouncements. President Trump vehemently pushed back on a reporter's persistent questions about Jeffrey Epstein, expressing frustration that the topic was still being discussed following a DOJ memo finding no evidence of a client list. Attorney General Pam Bondi clarified her previous comments on the matter, noting she had referred to reviewing a file, not an actual list. The president also suggested a federal intervention in his hometown, stating, "We have tremendous power at the White House to run places when we have to, and vowing to straighten out New York." Education Secretary Linda McMahon also escalated the administration's stance on transgender sports, threatening California with legal action for refusing to ban transgender girls from girls' sports. Meanwhile, House Speaker Mike Johnson exuded confidence about the newly enacted megabill, believing it would gain seats for Republicans in the 2026 midterms, despite warnings from Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer about deep cuts to international health programs and public broadcasting. As the administration continues to grapple with a wide array of pressing issues, from natural disasters and economic strategy to complex geopolitical challenges, the latest cabinet meeting underscored a highly centralized approach. The president's direct engagement with both domestic and international crises, coupled with his administration's willingness to challenge established norms and institutions, signals a continued period of dynamic governance. The coming weeks will undoubtedly test the efficacy of these policies, particularly as the August 1st tariff deadline looms and the humanitarian crisis in Texas demands sustained attention, all against the backdrop of a perpetually shifting global landscape. The global trade landscape remains gripped by an unprecedented state of flux as President Donald Trump's Liberation Day tariffs continue to ripple through economies worldwide, marked by a near-constant series of policy reversals and shifting deadlines. Just yesterday, President Trump emphatically declared on Truth Social that the August 1st, 2025 deadline for new tariff rates would stick, stating no extensions will be granted, a firm stance that directly contradicts his own earlier suggestion that the date wasn't 100% firm. This latest pronouncement is but the 28th instance of a significant policy flip-flop since the initial rollout of his sweeping tariff agenda, underscoring a pattern that has left businesses, investors, and international partners in a perpetual state of uncertainty. The journey to this August 1st deadline has been nothing short of a roller coaster. It began in February with President Trump's initial calls for reciprocal tariffs to ensure we're treated evenly, followed by a memorandum aiming to fix non-reciprocal trade arrangements. By late March, the administration announced 25% tariffs on imported cars and parts, with the president suggesting these would be permanent throughout his second term. However, the much-touted Liberation Day event on April 2 unveiled a policy that immediately diverged from prior assurances. Contrary to White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt's earlier claim of no exemptions, the executive order exempted critical sectors like pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and energy products. Furthermore, Trump himself backtracked on the reciprocal promise, stating the administration would charge them approximately half of what other countries have been charging us, a significant softening from his initial rhetoric. The ensuing weeks saw a rapid succession of conflicting messages that became characteristic of the administration's trade policy. On April 3, Trump's trade advisor Peter Navarro vehemently denied any intention to negotiate, calling the tariffs a national emergency, only for President Trump to tell reporters less than an hour later that he was open to negotiating. This back and forth continued, with aides simultaneously suggesting both an unyielding stance and openness to talks. The market's negative reaction to the initial implementation of tariffs on April 9, which saw the stock market plunge, triggered a dramatic about-face from the president. He announced a 90-day pause on the worst of the tariffs for most countries, maintaining a 10% baseline rate but significantly raising duties on Chinese goods to 125%. While officials like Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Press Secretary Leavitt attempted to frame this as a calculated art of the deal strategy, Trump himself immediately contradicted them, admitting the pause came together spontaneously because people were jumping a little bit out of line. They were getting yippee. The tech sector in particular has been whipsawed by these shifts. After initial suggestions of bringing all manufacturing to the U.S. including iPhones, U.S. Customs and Border Protection issued guidance on April 11 exempting smartphones, computers and other electronic devices, a move that directly countered earlier official statements. This exemption was then claimed to be only temporary by Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, with new tech tariffs in probably a month or two. President Trump further muddied the waters by claiming there was no tariff exception announced. Only a move to a different tariff bucket, followed by threats of 25% tariffs on iPhones if not manufactured in the U.S. and a staggering 200% tariff on pharmaceuticals if not produced domestically. These threats, though yet to fully materialize for critical imports like semiconductors, have sent jitters through global supply chains and stock markets, with pharmaceutical stocks like Pfizer, Amgen and AbbVie reacting immediately to Trump's comments. The ripple effects of this unpredictable policy have been profound. Wall Street has even coined the nickname Taco Trump, standing for Trump always chickens out, reflecting investors' belief that the president will ultimately back off his most severe tariff threats when markets react negatively. Deutsche Bank strategists, for instance, raised S&P 500 forecasts based on the expectation of further relents. This perception has led to a muted market response to the latest round of tariff letters, with IG Group chief market analyst Chris Beecham noting, rightly or wrongly, investors think they know what happens from here. Economically, the tariffs have already caused tangible harm. U.S. ocean imports from China tumbled 28% in June, and small business confidence has slipped. Consumers are also feeling the pinch, with a Yahoo Finance/Marist poll indicating widespread concern about personal finances due to tariff uncertainty impacting spending plans for events like Amazon Prime Day. Major international companies such as German carmaker Mercedes-Benz have reported significant sales declines directly impacted by the tariffs, and South African citrus farmers have seen their fortunes sour. Diplomatically, the policy has created immense pressure and uncertainty. President Trump recently sent letters to 14 countries including Japan, South Korea, Thailand and Malaysia, outlining new tariff rates ranging from 25% to 40%. Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba called the 25% tariff extremely regrettable, but noted it was lower than previously threatened, leaving room for negotiation. South Korea's trade ministry quickly announced accelerated negotiations. China, meanwhile, has warned against restarting trade tensions and threatened retaliation against nations that exclude it from supply chains, even as the US and China reached a vague trade framework last month. The European Union, facing a potential 17% tariff on agricultural exports, is reportedly racing to clinch a deal before the August 1 deadline, with Portugal's finance minister expressing hope for an agreement with very low tariffs. The United Nations Trade Agency has criticized the extended deadline for prolonging instability, while countries like Thailand and India are reworking trade proposals to secure better deals. Beyond the economic and diplomatic strains, the legal standing of these tariffs remains contentious. Two courts have already ruled Trump's Liberation Day tariffs unlawful and exceeding presidential authority, though these rulings are on hold pending appeals. A request for the Supreme Court to urgently review the tariff's legality was rejected, meaning the legal battle will continue to unfold over months, if not longer, leaving the long-term enforceability of the policy in question. As August 1 approaches, the precise shape of the global trade landscape remains opaque. Even for countries that have received tariff letters, the rates are subject to change, depending on our relationship with your country, leaving the door open for continued negotiations. While the administration has secured a few deals like those with the UK and Vietnam, the promise of 90 deals in 90 days has largely gone unfulfilled. The question of whether more goods will be tariffed or exempted, particularly critical imports like semiconductors or even baby products, which Besson stated was under consideration, hangs in the balance. The constant shifts, as Representative Ted Lieu, Democrat, California, put it, suggest the White House has no strategy and is rapidly losing credibility, a sentiment echoed by many across the political spectrum and the global market. The coming weeks will undoubtedly test the resolve of both the Trump administration and its trading partners as the world braces for what could be yet another unpredictable chapter in this ongoing trade saga. The corridors of Washington, D.C. have been abuzz this week as the Trump administration navigates a complex tapestry of domestic challenges, escalating global tensions, and ambitious policy overhauls. From a highly anticipated cabinet meeting to a flurry of tariff announcements and critical discussions on international conflicts, the White House has underscored its determined, and at times controversial, approach to governance, leaving a trail of both support and significant backlash in its wake. A focal point of the week's activities was President Trump's cabinet meeting, the first since April, where he sought to project an image of a government in decisive action. Notably absent was Elon Musk, previously a fixture at these gatherings as head of the Department of Government Efficiency, a departure that follows a recent major blow-up between Trump and Musk over the president's spending and tax cut bill. This internal dynamic hints at the pressures even close allies face within the administration's aggressive policy push. Chief among these policies is a sweeping reorientation of global trade. President Trump declared August 1, 2025 as a hard deadline for new tariff rates, stating unequivocally on Truth Social, all money will be due and payable starting August 1, 2025, no extensions will be granted. Letters outlining new tariff rates, ranging from 25% to 40%, have already been dispatched to over a dozen countries, including Japan, South Korea, and several Southeast Asian nations. The move, framed by the White House as a strategy for maximum leverage in trade talks and a means to fund recently signed tax cuts, has drawn sharp international criticism. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba called the 25% tariff on all Japanese imports extremely regrettable, though he noted the rate was slightly lower than previous threats, leaving room for negotiation. Trump has warned that any retaliatory tariffs would be met with additional U.S. levies, asserting, "Whatever the number you choose to raise them by will be added onto the 25% that we charge." Domestically, the impact is already being felt, with the National Federation of Independent Business reporting a slight dip in small business optimism in June, citing trade tensions and a sharp rise in firms reporting too high inventory levels, nearly double the share from May. Beyond general imports, Trump also suggested a very high-rate new tariff on pharmaceutical drugs, potentially up to 200%, and signed an executive order to impose a 50% tariff on copper, matching existing levies on steel and aluminum. He further warned of severe punishment for any countries attempting to challenge the U.S. dollar's status as the global reserve currency, equating such a loss to losing a war, a major world war. In foreign policy, the administration presented a complex and at times contradictory stance. President Trump confirmed the U.S. would resume sending defensive weapons to Ukraine, reversing a brief pause in shipments. This decision comes amidst escalating Russian attacks and growing pressure on Washington to maintain support for Ukraine's defense. During his cabinet meeting, Trump expressed strong dissatisfaction with Russian President Vladimir Putin, stating, "I'm not happy with Putin because he's killing a lot of people, including Russia's own soldiers." He dismissed Putin's friendliness as meaningless and revealed he was looking very strongly at the bipartisan Sanctioning Russia Act of 2025, a bill with 80 co-sponsors that includes measures like 500% tariffs on Russian oil, gas, and uranium, and restrictions on Russian sovereign debt. Meanwhile, the Middle East remained a critical focus. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with President Trump at the White House, with discussions largely centered on the ongoing conflict in Gaza. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff expressed hope for a 60-day ceasefire by week's end. The visit also saw a controversial moment when Netanyahu publicly nominated Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize, citing his efforts in forging peace in one country, in one region after the other. This nomination, however, was met with skepticism by former Israeli diplomat Alon Pinkas, who called it fealty and sycophancy, suggesting it was a strategic move by Netanyahu to avoid public humiliation. Pinkas, while optimistic about a short-term truce, remained very pessimistic about a lasting peace, citing fundamental incompatibilities between Israeli and Hamas objectives. The administration also addressed recent military actions, with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth stating that bombing Iran meant re-establishing American leadership and deterrence, a move Trump claimed had impressed America's potential enemies. Domestically, the administration faced scrutiny over its handling of the deadly Texas floods. As search and recovery efforts continued across the flood-ravaged central Texas, which has claimed over 90 lives including 27 children, questions arose regarding the federal response. Former NOAA Administrator Richard Spinrad linked staffing cuts at the National Weather Service under the Trump administration to communication breakdowns with emergency managers during the disaster. He specifically pointed to the absence of a warning coordination meteorologist in the Austin/San Antonio forecast office. Despite this, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt defended the federal response, praising Texas officials and dismissing claims of federal service cuts weakening the response as a depraved lie. The White House also refused to clarify if the disaster would affect Trump's stated plan to phase out the Federal Emergency Management Agency (FEMA), despite Trump having signed a major disaster declaration for Texas. Other domestic policy matters also garnered attention. A federal judge ruled that the Trump administration could proceed with rescinding nearly $800 million in federal grants intended for violence prevention and victim services programs. While U.S. District Judge Amit Mehta called the Department of Justice's actions shameful, he cited a lack of jurisdiction to block the move, which the DOJ stated was to realign funding with priorities like law enforcement and anti-trafficking. Critics, including California Attorney General Rob Bonta, warned this could be a profound setback for public safety. On immigration, Democratic lawmakers proposed the Visible Act, which would mandate federal immigration agents to wear legible identification and ban most face coverings during public enforcement operations. Amidst the Trump administration's pledge for the largest mass deportation in U.S. history, the week also saw a slight dip in President Trump's popularity, falling below that of former President Joe Biden and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in a recent YouGov ranking. Newsweek noted that a sitting president often serves as an open target for criticism, particularly with divisive policies like the One Big Beautiful Bill and the new tariffs. The administration also faced a MAGA backlash over its conclusions on Jeffrey Epstein's death, with Attorney General Pam Bondi explaining an alleged missing minute in video footage is due to an outdated recording system. However, staunch Trump ally Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene questioned the administration's findings, particularly regarding Ghislaine Maxwell's Little Black Book, echoing a sense of betrayal among some supporters who view the official explanation as a cover-up. Finally, a new AP&RC poll revealed that while the Trump administration explores ways to boost the U.S. birth rate, most Americans are not on board, with only 12% seeing it as a high priority. Instead, an overwhelming 75% called the high cost of childcare a major problem, underscoring a disconnect between public priorities and some administration initiatives. As the August 1 tariff deadline looms and the complexities of international diplomacy and domestic policy continue to unfold, the Trump administration remains in the spotlight, navigating a landscape defined by aggressive trade demands, shifting alliances, and an evolving public mandate. The coming weeks will undoubtedly test the resolve of the administration's policies and shape its legacy on both the global stage and at home. The global economy finds itself in an increasingly precarious stance, teetering on the brink of significant upheaval as President Donald Trump's administration relentlessly pursues its protectionist trade agenda. With a series of tariff deadlines looming and new threats emerging almost daily, the world watches closely as established trade relationships are rewired and industries brace for impact, according to recent reports from Reuters, Al Jazeera, The New York Times, and CNN. Since re-entering office, President Trump has unleashed a barrage of tariffs fundamentally aiming to reshape international commerce. These actions, characterized by their fits and starts implementation, have already triggered considerable volatility in global markets and intensified diplomatic tensions even among America's traditional allies. Most recently, on Monday, Mr. Trump threatened new tariffs on 14 nations set to take effect on August 1. These warnings, often delivered via his Truth Social platform, indicated a potential for further escalation should affected nations retaliate. This follows an abrupt 90-day reversal in April, which paused punishing levies on nearly 60 U.S. trading partners, all except China, to allow for negotiations. While some progress has been made, notably with agreements that lower tariffs on British cars, steel, aluminum, and aerospace equipment, and a new 20% tariff on most Vietnamese imports, 40% on transshipping, many countries including Japan, the European Union, Malaysia, and South Korea continue to cycle through Washington in an urgent bid to avert higher duties. The trade war's most prominent battleground remains the relationship between the United States and China. After an initial escalation of import taxes earlier this year, the two economic giants reached a handshake agreement in June. While specific details were sparse, the deal reportedly involved China relaxing restrictions on rare earth metals, critical for various high-tech manufacturing sectors, in exchange for the U.S. pulling back limits on exported products like ethane and airplane parts, and proposed visa restrictions. Despite the White House hailing this as progress, it largely appears to have returned the countries to a similar status quo that existed several months prior to the recent surge in tariff actions. Beyond China, the administration has also doubled tariffs on foreign steel and aluminum to 50%, a move intended to counter foreign countries that undercut the competitiveness of American industries. However, this has inadvertently raised costs for domestic businesses reliant on these metals, such as automakers, plane manufacturers, and home builders, potentially leading to higher consumer prices for everything from cars to canned goods. Similarly, a 25% duty on all cars assembled outside the U.S. and imported auto parts, while aimed at spurring domestic investment, could significantly inflate new car prices and repair costs. A notable recent development was the closure of the de minimis rule in May. This shipping loophole had allowed retailers to bypass tariffs on goods up to $800 shipped directly from China to American consumers, fueling the rapid growth of e-commerce platforms like Shein and Temu. Its closure is expected to level the playing field for U.S. manufacturers who struggled to compete with the influx of low-cost Chinese products. Looking ahead, the White House has also signaled potential new tariffs on semiconductors and pharmaceutical products, while Mr. Trump has even threatened a 100% tariff on foreign-made movies and a 25% duty on iPhones manufactured outside the U.S. The European Union, characterized by Mr. Trump as being formed to screw the United States, faces a daunting 50% tariff if it fails to concede on issues like policing American tech firms, value-added taxes, and increasing American car imports. President Trump's rationale for employing tariffs is rooted in his belief that any trade deficit signifies America being ripped off or subsidizing other nations. He and his advisors contend that these punitive measures will compel companies to manufacture products domestically, thereby creating American jobs and boosting wages. Furthermore, he views tariffs as a versatile tool to extract concessions from other countries and generate substantial revenue for the U.S. Treasury, which could then fund domestic tax cuts. However, economists widely dispute the feasibility of achieving all these goals simultaneously, often pointing to inherent contradictions. As Chad Bown, a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, observed, all of these tariffs are internally inconsistent with each other. So what is the real priority? Because you can't have all those things happen at once. Indeed, the very tariffs intended to bolster U.S. manufacturing are simultaneously making life more difficult for American producers by disrupting supply chains and inflating the cost of essential raw materials. Economically, a tariff is effectively a government surcharge paid by the importing company to the U.S. Treasury. For instance, if Walmart imports a $100 shoe from Myanmar, now subject to a 40% tariff, Walmart owes $40 to the U.S. government. The critical question then becomes who ultimately bears this cost. Walmart or any importer has several options: try to force the cost back onto the foreign manufacturer, absorb the cost by reducing its own profit margins, or pass the cost directly to consumers by raising retail prices. Often it's a combination. In May, Walmart's chief executive cautioned that tariffs would soon necessitate price increases, prompting Mr. Trump to publicly scold the retailer on social media, urging them to eat the tariffs and maintain low prices. The ripple effects of these tariffs are already being felt across various industries. The production cycle for holiday goods such as toys and decorations, a significant portion of which is manufactured in China, is typically in full swing by now. Yet toy makers and retailers are reportedly pausing orders for the upcoming winter holidays as import taxes cascade through their supply chains. Mattel, the maker of Barbie, has already announced price increases on U.S. toys due to tariffs on Chinese imports. While broad measures of inflation like the Consumer Price Index have yet to show a significant impact, economists largely agree that price increases are a matter of when, not if, with some expecting them to become more apparent later this summer. The current delay is attributed partly to businesses having stockpiled goods before the levies took effect, allowing them to defer price adjustments until those inventories are depleted. As the tariff deadline looms, questions persist about the true strength of U.S. manufacturing and its ability to absorb or benefit from these seismic shifts. Wall Street, often a barometer of economic sentiment, appears to be calling Trump's bluff, suggesting a degree of market adaptation or skepticism regarding the ultimate impact or longevity of these policies. The constant flux in trade policy, marked by threats, reversals, and ongoing negotiations, creates an environment of profound uncertainty for businesses and consumers alike. The coming months will be crucial in determining whether these aggressive trade tactics achieve their stated goals of reindustrializing America, or if they lead to prolonged global economic instability and higher costs for ordinary citizens. The intricate web of global supply chains, deeply intertwined over decades, will continue to bend under this pressure. But whether it breaks or merely reshapes remains the overarching question. In a dramatic turn of events that has sent ripples of both relief and renewed hope through Kyiv, the United States has reversed its recent decision to suspend military aid to Ukraine. After a week of escalating alarm over Washington's sudden halt of critical weapons shipments, President Donald Trump has pledged to resume assistance, a commitment swiftly confirmed by the Pentagon, marking a significant shift in a relationship frequently characterized by uncertainty. The alarm bells for Ukraine began ringing just last week when the U.S. Department of Defense confirmed to American media outlets that it had suspended the delivery of vital military resources. These resources, which included highly sought-after Patriot anti-aircraft missiles, portable Stinger missiles, anti-drone rockets, precision missiles, and artillery ammunition, had been agreed upon during the final stages of the Biden administration. The decision prompted immediate concern in Kyiv, leading Ukraine's foreign ministry to recall the acting U.S. ambassador John Jinkel for consultations on July 2 to convey its profound disquiet. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky himself engaged in a productive conversation with President Trump on July 4, explaining that his nation would be helpless in the face of large-scale Russian strikes without U.S. air defenses, and securing a commitment from the Republican leader to explore avenues of support. The catalyst for this abrupt policy reversal appears to be a pivotal telephone call between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin on July 3. Until recently, Trump had often adopted a conciliatory stance towards Putin regarding the conflict. However, the conversation reportedly left Trump very disappointed, as the Russian autocrat confirmed his unwavering intention to carry on with the invasion and showed no interest in an unconditional ceasefire. "I don't think he's looking to stop, and that's too bad," Trump remarked, signaling a clear shift in his perception of Putin's intentions and consequently his approach to the conflict. Following Trump's pledge, the U.S. Department of Defense officially announced the unblocking of military aid on Monday, July 7. Chief Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell affirmed the decision, stating that our framework for the president to evaluate military shipments across the globe remains in effect and is integral to our America First defense priorities. This statement, while confirming the resumption of aid, also subtly underscored the administration's overarching strategic doctrine. The news was met with palpable relief in Ukraine, with the Ukrainian outlet Telegraph succinctly capturing the national mood with the headline, "Trump didn't lie, the Pentagon announced good news for Ukraine." Andriy Kovalenko, a member of Ukraine's National Security Council, echoed this sentiment on social media, noting there will be U.S. weapons. Despite the many discussions and publications about the U.S. withdrawal, there should have been less fuss. Most of what was written was false. With the aid now set to flow, delegations from both governments are expected to meet soon to finalize the specific weapons packages. Ukraine's immediate priority remains air defense equipment, particularly Patriot missiles, which are considered Kyiv's most effective counter against Russian ballistic missiles. Military analyst Ivan Stupik further highlighted the critical need for Stinger surface-to-air missiles, noting their absence from the front lines and their essential role in repelling Russian helicopter and aircraft attacks. Beyond direct U.S. aid, Ukraine has also been actively engaging its European partners. During the recent NATO summit in the Netherlands, President Zelensky proposed that European allies could purchase military aid for Ukraine, a concept that has seen Germany in particular begin negotiations with Washington to acquire Patriot missiles and their associated launch batteries. This was a key point of discussion during German Chancellor Friedrich Merz's phone call with President Trump on July 4. Furthermore, Ukrainian diplomatic efforts extend to pressing for new economic sanctions against Russia, with Republican Senator Lindsey Graham emerging as a key ally in this endeavor. Kyiv anticipates that the U.S. president will support additional measures this month. This complex interplay of military assistance and economic pressure underscores the multifaceted nature of the ongoing conflict and the critical role of international alliances. As the U.S. re-engages with substantial military support, the focus will now turn to the speed and scope of these deliveries and how they will impact the evolving dynamics on the Ukrainian front lines. The intricate dance of global diplomacy has always been a nuanced affair, but under the Trump administration it appears to have taken on a distinctly personalized hue, where the art of flattery has become a surprisingly potent tool. This week the spotlight shone brightly on this phenomenon when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, during a White House dinner on Monday, presented President Trump with a letter nominating him for the Nobel Peace Prize, a moment captured by news cameras and immediately broadcast across the globe. "I want to present to you, Mr. President, the letter I sent to the Nobel Prize Committee," Netanyahu declared, adding, "It's well-deserved and you should get it." Trump, visibly pleased, called the gesture very meaningful. Despite his long-held public skepticism about ever receiving the prestigious award, this highly publicized act of admiration is the latest in a series of calculated moves by world leaders who seem to have deciphered the most effective way to navigate relations with the American president: lavish him with praise. As Sam Edwards, an associate professor of modern political history at Loughborough University in Britain, observed, "We've often thought of diplomacy as this big, broad endeavor. It's about institutions connecting with one another. In this instance, they're playing the man. This is how it works. You come with gifts, you offer homage of sorts in order to gain the respect, the support, the favor of the head of that court." Beyond Netanyahu, other prominent figures have adopted this strategy. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, who once labeled Trump a bully, last month effusively praised "your personal leadership of the United States." Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, privately texted Trump to hail "your decisive action in Iran that was truly extraordinary," a message Trump promptly made public. Even Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who endured a famously tense Oval Office meeting in February, has demonstrably shifted his approach. Following what Yolanda Spies, a former South African diplomat and director of the Oxford University Diplomatic Studies program, described as a humiliation, Zelensky has since avoided those kinds of scenarios where he ends up having an argument with Donald Trump. He now prefaces every statement with how grateful he is to America. There a lesson was learned. This shift appears to have yielded tangible results, as Trump agreed on Monday to resume certain weapon shipments to Ukraine that had been halted just a week prior. A reversal that followed improved relations with Zelensky and a reportedly disappointing phone call with Russian President Putin. However, the efficacy of this flattery game remains a subject of considerable debate among political analysts and seasoned diplomats. While public declarations of admiration can smooth over immediate interactions, they do not always translate into concrete long-term policy benefits, particularly with a leader whose decision-making is often perceived as mercurial. For instance, despite Netanyahu's effusive praise for Trump forging peace as we speak in one country and one region after the other, the brutal war in Gaza continues unabated even amidst renewed ceasefire talks. Similarly, the conflict in Ukraine rages on, defying Trump's past promise to resolve it within 24 hours. Even British exports to America still face tariffs. Despite Prime Minister Keir Starmer securing a deal with Trump partly by delivering a royal invitation, the public nature of modern diplomacy is a significant factor in this shift. Spies noted that while flattery has always been an element of diplomatic art, the most personal interactions between leaders traditionally occurred in private. One of the driving thoughts of the profession of diplomacy is do all the hard work behind the scenes where no one is watching, she explained. Now you have to be really careful because anything you send to him will be public. It means a new step in the flattery game. Netanyahu's Nobel nomination letter dated July 1 and sent to the Norwegian Nobel Committee did not mention the ongoing conflict in Gaza. Instead, it focused on Trump's pivotal role in negotiating the Abraham Accords in 2020, which normalized relations between Israel and several Arab nations including the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. Netanyahu lauded Trump's steadfast and exceptional dedication to promoting peace, security, and stability around the world, crediting him with reshaping the region's geopolitical landscape through innovative diplomacy defined not by conflict and extremism but by cooperation, dialogue, and shared prosperity. The Abraham Accords have indeed fostered unprecedented cooperation in trade, technology, and security, with UAE-Israel trade reaching $10 billion by 2024. This nomination follows a similar one from Pakistan in June, citing Trump's diplomatic intervention during an outbreak of violence between India and Pakistan earlier this year. Trump has made no secret of his desire for the Nobel Peace Prize, frequently lamenting on social media that he believes he will never receive it, no matter what I do. Yet the latest nomination has also drawn criticism, particularly given the ongoing conflict in Gaza and accusations of war crimes against Netanyahu by the International Criminal Court. Medea Benjamin, founder of the anti-war group Code Pink, captured the sentiment of many critics, posting on social media, "I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Surreal." The Nobel Committee will review Trump's candidacy alongside others, with a decision anticipated in October 2026. Despite the highly personalized nature of these interactions, underlying strategic divergences persist. During their meeting, Netanyahu and Trump discussed a self-proclaimed victory in a military campaign against Iranian nuclear sites, which followed Trump's unprecedented bombing of Iran's nuclear facilities. However, diplomats indicate that the US and Israel still diverge on how to pursue the Iran endgame. Furthermore, Netanyahu reiterated his long-held position that a ceasefire in Gaza should not lead to Palestinian statehood, a stance that complicates broader peace efforts. As global leaders continue to adapt to this unique diplomatic landscape characterized by public displays of deference and highly personalized appeals, the effectiveness of playing the man will remain under intense scrutiny. Whether this strategy ultimately yields lasting peace and stability or merely serves as a temporary balm for volatile relations will shape the future of international engagement in an era defined by unconventional statecraft.